Welcome to Dream Tale Sleep Stories. Tonight's reading is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Settle into your bed or sofa and let your shoulders, jaw, and eyelids grow heavy. Inhale slowly. 1, 2, 3, and sigh the air away, allowing the day to fade into quiet dark. With every soft inhale, you invite fresh English phrases. With every gentle exhale, stray thoughts drift farther off. Behind my voice flows a gentle 528 Hz melody, renowned for guiding the mind toward deep relaxation. Keep your eyes closed or follow the captions, whichever feels right. Simply receive the rhythm and resonance of the language. Deep in rest, tonight's phrases will take root like seeds, ready to bloom into stronger English skills with the morning light. When you feel settled, hold that unhurried breath and allow yourself to drift into the tale. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs begins now, and when the story's final line has faded, the music will linger a little longer, carrying you gently deeper into sleep. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In a kingdom where winter's embrace lingered perpetually upon the mountainous landscape, there stood a magnificent castle whose towers pierced the gray sky like accusatory fingers. Within these stone walls lived King Frederick, a man of noble bearing but gentle disposition, and his beloved wife, Queen Isabella, whose beauty was renowned throughout the neighboring realms. Their happiness seemed complete when Isabella gave birth to a daughter with skin as white as freshly fallen snow, lips as red as the blood that had stained the queen's finger while embroidering by her frost-covered window, and hair as black as the ebony frame that held her looking-glass. They named their precious child Snow White, and for 7 blissful years, the castle echoed with laughter and joy. However, fate, as it often does, dealt a cruel hand when Queen Isabella fell gravely ill during a particularly harsh winter. On her deathbed, she called Snow White to her side and with trembling hands placed a small silver locket around her daughter's neck. "My dearest child," the dying queen whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind outside. "Remember that true beauty comes not from what others see, but from the kindness that dwells within your heart. Promise me you will never forget this truth, no matter what trials may await you." Snow White, though only 7 years old, understood the gravity of her mother's words and promised with tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Queen Isabella smiled one final time before closing her eyes forever, leaving behind a grief-stricken king and a motherless child. The following spring, King Frederick, unable to bear his solitude and believing his daughter needed a mother's guidance, married Lady Ravenna, a woman of extraordinary beauty who had arrived at court claiming to be a distant cousin of a neighboring kingdom's royal family. Ravenna possessed an otherworldly allure that seemed to captivate every man who gazed upon her. But beneath her stunning exterior lay a heart consumed by vanity and an insatiable hunger for power. From the moment she became queen, Ravenna's true nature began to reveal itself. she installed herself in the highest tower of the castle, transforming the chamber into a shrine to her own magnificence. The centerpiece of this vanity was an ancient mirror, framed in twisted silver and embedded with strange, dark jewels that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. This was no ordinary looking glass, for it possessed a malevolent consciousness and spoke in riddles and truths that mortals feared to hear. Each morning, Queen Ravenna would stand before this enchanted mirror and pose the question that had become her obsession. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And each morning, the mirror's deep, resonant voice would respond with the answer that fed her pride. You, my queen, are the fairest of them all. For years, this ritual continued, and Ravenna's confidence in her supreme beauty remained unshaken. She ruled the kingdom with an iron fist, her beauty serving as both shield and weapon against any who might dare oppose her. The courtiers whispered behind closed doors about the king's increasing frailty and the queen's strange nocturnal activities, but none dared speak openly of their suspicions. Meanwhile, Snow White grew from a precocious child into a young woman of breathtaking beauty, though she remained blissfully unaware of her effect on others. She spent her days tending to the castle's gardens, reading in the library, and caring for the sick and poor who came to the castle gates seeking help. Her kindness was legendary among the common people, who often said that merely seeing her smile could lift the heaviest of hearts. On Snow White's 16th birthday, as she stood in the garden, feeding the songbirds that always seemed drawn to her presence, Queen Ravenna performed her daily ritual before the magic mirror. But on this day, the mirror's response would change everything. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? Ravenna asked with her usual confidence. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water before the voice emerged, darker and more ominous than ever before. You are fair, my queen, it's true, but Snow White has grown more beautiful than you. The words struck Ravenna like physical blows, and she staggered backward, her face contorting with rage and disbelief. She pressed her hands against the mirror's cold surface and demanded, "Show me." The mirror's surface swirled and transformed, revealing an image of Snow White in the garden, surrounded by singing birds and blooming flowers, her beauty so radiant that even the hardened glass seemed to soften at the sight of her. "Impossible!" Ravenna shrieked, her carefully maintained composure cracking like thin ice. "I am the fairest. I have sacrificed everything for beauty. I have used dark magic to preserve my youth." But the mirror, bound by ancient spells to speak only truth, remained silent. Ravenna's fury consumed her rational thought, and she began to pace the chamber like a caged wolf, her mind already formulating a plan to eliminate this threat to her supremacy. The next morning, Ravenna summoned her most trusted huntsman, a grizzled man named Heinrich, who had served the castle faithfully for 20 years. Heinrich was a simple man who valued loyalty above all else. But even he felt uncomfortable in the queen's presence, sensing the darkness that seemed to emanate from her very being. "Heinrich," Ravenna said, her voice deceptively calm, "I have a task of utmost importance for you. You must take the princess deep into the forest and kill her." Heinrich's weathered face went pale with shock. "My queen, surely you cannot mean—" "I mean exactly what I say," Ravenna interrupted, her eyes blazing with cold fire. "The girl has been plotting against me, spreading lies and poison among the people. She is a threat to the kingdom's stability and must be eliminated." Heinrich knew in his heart that the queen's words were false, for he had watched Snow White grow up and knew her to be incapable of malice. But he also knew that refusing the queen's direct order would mean his own death, and he had a family to protect. "As proof of your success," Ravenna continued, producing an ornate jewelry box, "you will bring me her heart." With a heavy heart and trembling hands, Heinrich accepted the box and bowed his head in reluctant agreement. That very afternoon, he approached Snow White with a fabricated story about her father wishing her to gather rare herbs that grew in the deepest parts of the forest. Snow White, trusting and eager to help her ailing father, readily agreed to accompany the huntsman. They traveled for hours through increasingly dense woodland until they reached a clearing, surrounded by ancient oaks whose branches formed a natural cathedral overhead. It was there that Heinrich's resolve finally crumbled. As Snow White knelt by a stream to fill her water flask, he drew his hunting knife with shaking hands. But when she turned to smile at him, her face glowing with innocence and trust, he could not bring himself to complete his terrible task. "Princess," he said, falling to his knees before her, "you must flee this place immediately and never return to the castle. The queen has ordered your death, and if you remain, others will surely be sent to finish what I cannot." Snow White's eyes widened with shock and confusion, but the urgency in Heinrich's voice convinced her of the truth of his words. "But where can I go? And what about my father?" "Your father is beyond help now," Heinrich said sadly, choosing not to reveal that the king had died mysteriously in his sleep 3 days earlier, most likely poisoned by the queen. "You must trust in Providence and your own courage. Go now, deeper into the forest, and may God protect you." As Snow White disappeared into the shadows between the trees, Heinrich killed a wild boar and placed its heart in the queen's jewelry box, hoping the deception would buy the princess time to escape. Snow White wandered through the forest for hours, her silk dress torn by brambles and her delicate shoes worn through by the rough forest floor. As darkness began to fall, she found herself more lost and frightened than she had ever been in her sheltered life. The forest seemed alive with strange sounds and moving shadows, and more than once, she thought she glimpsed glowing eyes watching her from the darkness. Just as despair began to overwhelm her, Snow White spotted a warm, golden light filtering through the trees ahead. Following the light, she discovered a peculiar cottage that seemed to have grown from the forest itself. The dwelling was perfectly proportioned, but unusually small, as if built for people no taller than children. Smoke curled invitingly from its chimney, and through the windows, she could see the glow of a cheerful fire. Desperate for shelter and exhausted by her ordeal, Snow White knocked tentatively on the tiny door. When no answer came, she tried the handle and found it unlocked. Inside, she discovered a home that was both charming and meticulously organized. 7 small beds lined one wall, each made with military precision and adorned with a different colored quilt. A long table dominated the center of the room, set with 7 place settings of varying sizes, but all equally clean and carefully arranged. Everything in the cottage spoke of inhabitants who, though small in stature, possessed great pride in their home and their possessions. Snow White noticed that each item seemed to have its designated place, and despite her exhaustion, she took care not to disturb the perfect order she found. However, hunger and fatigue eventually overcame her caution, and she helped herself to small portions from 7 different plates she found in the kitchen, along with sips from 7 different cups. Afterwards, overwhelmed by exhaustion, she tested each of the 7 beds before finally settling into the one that seemed most comfortable, where she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She was awakened some hours later by the sound of voices engaged in animated discussion. Opening her eyes, Snow White found herself surrounded by 7 of the most unusual men she had ever seen. Though fully grown, they were all shorter than she was, with faces weathered by hard work, but eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. The apparent leader of the group, a distinguished gentleman with a magnificent white beard and kind eyes, stepped forward and spoke in a voice that was both gentle and authoritative. "Young lady, while we are not unwelcome to guests in our home, we must confess to considerable curiosity about how you came to be sleeping in Thorin's bed." Snow White sat up, suddenly aware of how she must appear to these strange but obviously decent men. "I am terribly sorry for intruding in your home without permission," she began, her voice trembling with embarrassment and residual fear. "My name is Snow White, and I am fleeing from someone who wishes to do me harm. I saw your light through the forest and hoped for shelter." The 7 men exchanged meaningful glances before the leader nodded slowly. "I am Doc," he said formally, "and these are my companions, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Sneezy, Bashful, and Thorin, whose bed you have honored with your presence. We are miners who work the crystal caves in these mountains." As Snow White explained her circumstances, carefully omitting the full truth about her royal identity, but making it clear that she was in genuine danger, the Dwarfs doesn't forget. He always leads them. And Snow White turned around, seeing the Dwarfs' eager miners disappear. The 7 men exchanged indecisively, before the leader nodded slowly. "I am Doc," he said formally, "and these are my companions, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, and Thorin. We are miners and do our work." As Snow White explained her circumstances, carefully omitting the full truth about her royal identity, but making it clear that she was in genuine danger, the dwarfs ended their confidence, and Doc stepped forward. Expressions grew increasingly sympathetic. Doc, who seemed to serve as their spokesman, consulted quietly with his companions before returning to address her. "We are simple men who live simple lives," he said thoughtfully. "But we recognize genuine distress when we see it, and we are not the sort to turn away someone in need. You are welcome to remain with us, but understand that we cannot offer you the luxuries you may be accustomed to. Our life requires hard work and self-reliance." Snow White accepted their offer with heartfelt gratitude, and thus began a period that she would later remember as among the happiest of her life. Each morning, the 7 dwarfs would set off for their work in the mines, and Snow White would tend to their cottage, preparing meals, mending clothes, and maintaining the orderly household that clearly meant so much to them. But Snow White's contributions went far beyond mere domestic duties. She brought to their home a warmth and joy that had been absent from their bachelor existence. Her laughter echoed through the cottage in the evenings as she listened to their stories of life in the mines, and her genuine interest in their work and their thoughts made each dwarf feel valued and appreciated in a way they had never experienced before. Grumpy, whose permanent scowl had earned him his name, found himself smiling despite his best efforts to maintain his curmudgeonly reputation. Happy, already the most cheerful of the group, seemed to glow with additional joy in Snow White's presence. Even Sleepy appeared more alert and engaged when she was around. For her part, Snow White discovered that the simple life suited her far better than the complex politics and artificial relationships of court. She learned to bake bread, to tend a vegetable garden, and to find satisfaction in work well done. The dwarfs taught her about the forest, showing her which berries were safe to eat, which herbs could cure common ailments, and how to read the weather signs in the clouds and wind. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Queen Ravenna had received Heinrich's gruesome offering with savage satisfaction. She held the bloody heart up to the light, examining it with the detached fascination of a natural philosopher studying a specimen. "So perishes the threat to my supremacy," she murmured to herself, before storing the organ in a crystal container she kept for her magical experiments. The next morning, she approached her mirror with renewed confidence, certain that the troublesome girl was no longer a concern. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" she asked, with her characteristic arrogance. The mirror's surface swirled ominously before the familiar voice responded, with words that sent ice through Ravenna's veins. "You want a fair, my queen, it's true. But beyond the 7 mountains high, where 7 dwarfs in cottage lie, Snow White still lives, the fairest of all." Ravenna's scream of rage echoed through the castle's highest tower, causing the very stones to tremble. She realized immediately that Heinrich had betrayed her, and her fury knew no bounds. In her wrath, she began to pace the chamber like a wild animal, her mind racing through possibilities for revenge. If I must kill the girl myself, then so be it, she snarled at the mirror. But this time, there will be no possibility of failure. Drawing upon the dark, magical knowledge she had accumulated over the years, Ravenna began to prepare a disguise that would allow her to approach Snow White undetected. She brewed potions that altered her appearance, transforming her regal bearing into the stooped posture of an elderly peasant woman. Her smooth, pale skin became wrinkled and spotted with age. Her lustrous hair turned gray and brittle, and her voice changed from melodious tones to a crackling whisper. Satisfied with her transformation, Ravenna filled a basket with apples that she had carefully treated with a powerful sleeping poison. The enchantment was particularly insidious, designed to place its victim in a death-like sleep from which only true love's kiss could provide awakening. Disguised as a harmless old woman selling fruit, Ravenna made her way through the forest, guided by the magic mirror's knowledge of Snow White's location. She timed her arrival for a morning when she knew the 7 dwarfs would be away at their work, leaving Snow White alone and vulnerable. Snow White was hanging laundry in the cottage's small garden when she heard the old woman's voice calling out, "Fresh apples, beautiful red apples for sale." Looking up from her work, Snow White saw what appeared to be a harmless elderly peddler woman struggling with a heavy basket. Her kind heart immediately moved her to offer assistance. "Good morning," Snow White called out cheerfully. "You look tired from your travels. Would you like some water to drink?" Ravenna, maintaining her disguise perfectly, accepted the offer gratefully and began to praise Snow White's beauty and kindness. "Such a lovely young woman," she wheezed convincingly. "You remind me of my own granddaughter. May she rest in peace. Please, take one of these apples as a gift from an old woman who appreciates beauty when she sees it." The apple she offered was particularly beautiful, with skin so red and glossy it seemed to glow with inner fire. Snow White hesitated, remembering the dwarf's warnings about accepting anything from strangers. But the old woman seemed so harmless and genuinely kind that her natural compassion overcame her caution. "Thank you for your generosity," Snow White said, accepting the fruit. "It's beautiful." "Beauty recognizes beauty," Ravenna replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her disguised eyes. "Go ahead, try it. I guarantee you've never tasted anything so sweet." Snow White raised the apple to her lips and took a small, tentative bite. The fruit was indeed incredibly sweet, with a flavor that seemed almost magical in its intensity. But before she could take a second bite, the poison began to work its evil magic. A strange numbness began to spread through her body, starting from her lips and radiating outward like ripples in a pond. She tried to call out for help, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. The apple fell from her nerveless fingers as her vision began to blur and darken around the edges. What's happening to me?" she whispered, reaching out blindly as her legs gave way beneath her. Ravenna's disguise began to fade as her triumph overwhelmed her self-control. "What's happening, my dear, is that you are finally getting what you deserve," she said, her voice returning to its normal, melodious cruelty. "Sleep well, Snow White, for you shall sleep forever, and I shall once again be the fairest of them all." Snow White collapsed to the ground, her breathing becoming so shallow as to be nearly imperceptible. Her skin took on a marble-like pallor, and her lips, which had been red as roses, faded to the palest pink. To any observer, she would have appeared quite dead, which was precisely the effect Ravenna had intended. Satisfied with her work, the evil queen departed as quickly as she had come, leaving Snow White lying motionless among the scattered laundry and fallen apple. When the 7 dwarfs returned from their work that evening, they found their beloved Snow White in this death-like state. Their grief was overwhelming and immediate. Doc knelt beside her still form and checked for any sign of life, while the others gathered around in stunned silence. "She's breathing, but barely," Doc announced after a thorough examination. "And her pulse is so weak, I can hardly detect it. This is no natural sleep." They carefully carried Snow White into the cottage and placed her on Doc's bed, which was the largest and most comfortable. For 3 days and nights, they maintained a constant vigil beside her, trying every remedy they knew, but nothing seemed to have any effect on her condition. Grumpy, whose gruff exterior hid the most tender of hearts, wept openly at her bedside. "We should have warned her more strongly about strangers," he said repeatedly. "We should have protected her better." Happy, for the first time since anyone could remember, lived up to his name not at all, sitting in silent dejection and refusing to eat or speak. Sleepy could not sleep at all, spending the nights watching Snow White's barely perceptible breathing and praying for some sign of improvement. On the 4th day, as the dwarfs debated what to do with their beloved friend's seemingly lifeless body, a young man appeared at their door. He was tall and handsome, with kind eyes and noble bearing, dressed in the fine clothes of a prince, but travel-stained from a long journey through the forest. "Good gentlemen," he said respectfully, "I am Prince Alexander of the neighboring kingdom. I have been searching these woods for days, following reports of a beautiful maiden who disappeared from her home. I fear she may be in great danger." Doc studied the young man carefully before responding. "We have indeed been caring for such a young woman, though I fear you may be too late to help her. She has been under a magical curse for 4 days now, and we have been unable to wake her." Prince Alexander's face grew pale with concern. "May I see her?" he asked urgently. "I have some knowledge of magic and curses. Perhaps I can help." The dwarfs led him to Snow White's bedside, and the moment Alexander saw her, he knew that he had found not just the missing maiden, but the woman who was destined to be his true love. Even in her cursed sleep, her beauty was breathtaking, but it was more than mere physical attraction that drew him to her. Something in her peaceful expression, spoke to his soul of kindness, purity, and goodness. "I have heard of such curses," he said, quietly, kneeling beside the bed. "They are broken, not by magic or medicine, but by true love's kiss." Doc looked skeptical. "With all due respect, Your Highness, you have only just met her. How can you claim to truly love someone you don't know?" Alexander considered this question seriously before answering. "You are right to question me. I cannot claim to know her mind or her character based on sight alone. But I can tell you that from the moment I saw her, I felt a recognition in my soul, as if I had been searching for her all my life without knowing what I was looking for. If true love can exist at first sight, then what I feel for her is indeed true love." The dwarfs exchanged glances, uncertain whether to trust this stranger with their precious Snow White. But as they looked at her motionless form, they realized that they had exhausted all other options. "If there is even a chance that you can save her," Bashful said quietly, "then you must try." Alexander nodded solemnly and leaned over Snow White's still form. Very gently, with all the reverence of a prayer, he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both tender and passionate, filled with all the love he felt for this beautiful stranger. For a moment, nothing happened, and Alexander felt his heart sink with disappointment. But then Snow White's lips seemed to grow warmer beneath his, and a faint flush of color began to return to her pale cheeks. Her breathing deepened, and her eyelids began to flutter. Slowly, as if awakening from the deepest of dreams, Snow White opened her eyes and found herself looking into the concerned face of the most handsome young man she had ever seen. "Am I dreaming?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from her long sleep. "If you are," Alexander replied with a smile that lit up his entire face, "then we are sharing the same dream. For I too find it hard to believe that someone so beautiful could be real." The 7 dwarfs gathered around the bed, their faces shining with joy and relief. Happy was laughing and crying at the same time. Grumpy was trying unsuccessfully to hide his own tears, and even Sleepy seemed wide awake with excitement. As Snow White sat up slowly, testing her returning strength, she noticed something different about the world around her. The colors seemed more vivid, the air felt cleaner and fresher, and she experienced a sense of joy and completeness that she had never felt before. Alexander helped her to her feet, and as their hands touched, both felt an electric connection that confirmed what each had already begun to suspect. This was indeed true love, the kind that poets wrote about, and that most people spent their entire lives searching for without ever finding. "I am Prince Alexander," he said, bowing formally despite the intimate circumstances of their meeting. "And I believe you are the Princess Snow White, whose disappearance has caused great concern throughout the neighboring kingdoms." Snow White was surprised to learn that her story had spread so far, but she was even more amazed by the revelation that this prince had been searching specifically for her. As they talked, sharing their stories and getting to know each other, it became clear that they were perfectly matched in temperament, values, and interests. The seven dwarfs, recognizing that their time with Snow White was coming to an end, began to prepare for her departure with mixed emotions. They were overjoyed that she had been saved and had found true love, but they were also heartbroken at the prospect of losing the woman who had brought such happiness into their lives. "You will always have a home with us," Doc told her as she prepared to leave with Alexander. "Whenever you need refuge or simply wish to visit old friends, our door will be open to you." Snow White embraced each of the dwarfs in turn, promising to return soon for a proper visit and to never forget the kindness they had shown her during her time of greatest need. Prince Alexander, understanding the debt he owed to these seven men who had protected and cared for his beloved, invited them to his kingdom as honored guests at his wedding to Snow White. He also promised them positions at his court if they ever tired of their mining work, though he suspected they would prefer to remain in their beloved forest home. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Queen Ravenna had been basking in her renewed supremacy. For several days, her magic mirror had confirmed that she was once again the fairest of them all. And she had convinced herself that her troubles were finally over. But on the morning that Snow White awoke from her cursed sleep, the mirror delivered news that sent Ravenna into the most violent rage of her life. Ravenna's scream of fury could be heard throughout the castle, causing servants to flee in terror and making the very walls seem to tremble. In her insane rage, she began to destroy everything within reach, hurling priceless artifacts against the stone walls and tearing at her own hair and clothing. The dark magic that had sustained her beauty for so many years suddenly turned against her, unable to maintain its power in the face of such consuming hatred and jealousy. Her smooth skin began to wrinkle and sag, her lustrous hair turned brittle and gray, and her elegant figure became bent and twisted with age. As her beauty fled, so too did her magical power, and the enchanted mirror, no longer bound to serve her, began to reveal the full extent of her crimes. Images flashed across its surface, showing her various murders, including that of Snow White's father, her experiments with dark magic, and her attempts on Snow White's life. The castle guards, who had long suspected the queen of terrible deeds, but had been too afraid to act, finally found the courage to enter her chamber and arrest her. They found a withered old hag, ranting about fairness and beauty, barely recognizable as the woman who had once commanded their fear and obedience. Ravenna was imprisoned in the deepest dungeons of the castle, where she spent her remaining days raving about mirrors and beauty, until madness finally claimed her completely. The magic mirror, its evil purpose fulfilled, cracked down the middle and went dark forever, becoming nothing more than ordinary glass. Snow White and Prince Alexander were married in a ceremony that was attended by representatives from dozens of kingdoms. But the guests who held the places of highest honor were seven dwarfs who had traveled from their forest home to see their beloved friend wed to her true love. The wedding was a celebration not just of their love, but of the triumph of good over evil, of kindness over cruelty, and of truth over deception. Snow White had learned that true beauty indeed came from within, as her dying mother had told her, and that the love and friendship she had found were far more valuable than any crown or title. Prince Alexander proved to be a wise and just ruler, and Snow White became known throughout the land as a queen who never forgot her humble origins or the importance of kindness to all people, regardless of their station in life. Together, they ruled with wisdom and compassion, ensuring that their kingdom became known as a place where justice prevailed and the innocent were protected. The 7 dwarfs continued to visit the royal court regularly, and Snow White made sure to return to their forest cottage at least once each year, maintaining the friendships that had sustained her through her darkest hours. Their cottage became a symbol of the simple virtues that truly mattered in life: loyalty, friendship, hard work, and contentment with one's lot. And they all lived, if not entirely without challenges or sorrows, then at least with the knowledge that love and goodness ultimately triumph over hatred and evil, making even the most difficult trials bearable when faced with courage and the support of true friends. The story of Snow White became a legend told throughout the land, reminding all who heard it that beauty fades, but kindness endures forever, and that true love has the power to overcome even the darkest magic. Children grew up hearing the tale, learning from it the importance of treating others with compassion and never allowing jealousy or vanity to corrupt their hearts. In the forest cottage, 7 beds still stood ready for guests, and the sound of mining songs could still be heard echoing through the mountain valleys, a testament to the enduring power of friendship and the simple joys that make life truly worthwhile.